What you want more than anything is you want to meet people with different experiences. And I've always sort of found you would see things that you would not automatically have come across.
Hello and welcome to the Parliamentary Review Podcast, the podcast that has a soft spot for raising standards. I'm Matthew O'Neill, and in each episode I'm joined by directors, CEOs, CFOs, government ministers, and chairmen and women. The aim is to discover who these people are, the people who get up each morning and make Britain work. We discuss the innovation that leads to success in this country, and also we get their take on the current political and economic state of the country. Later on in this episode, you have the chance to hear Jonathan White's exclusive interview with Lord Pickles, former Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government and Chairman of the Conservative Party, and of course current co-chairman of the Parliamentary Review. But for now, we're joined by Inga Neaves, founder and career strategist of Scion Mastery. Inga, hello.
Hello. Hello, Matthew.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you on the podcast. We might as well get stuck straight in. It's been a few months since Scion Mastery appeared in the Parliamentary Review. What has happened in the ensuing months?
Not much really happened during those months, but we set the goals and we set our objectives, what we want to do for next year, and what will be our goals to achieve in 12 months. We identify the problems that we are facing every day in terms of students, in terms of their career, in terms of students who are applying for jobs, who are applying for universities, who are applying to schools. And we could see where the parents are struggling and where the employees are struggling to hire, to hold, and to actually blame the universities or the schools to prepare a very difficult to handle generation that's going to lead the world to the future.
Well, I'd like to talk more about that generation in a moment. But before we get there, a lot of time has passed since Scion Mastery was founded in 1993. What has changed in the market and what has stayed the same?
The same is much easier, and I think it will stay always the same. The traditionally English education seen as something that people could rely on, that is absolutely not changeable in terms of a base. The base structure is very clear, very easy to follow, and reliable, basically reliable. Let's say the obvious state. Everybody complains about system of education. Educational system is nowhere good, nowhere in the world. Some countries go so far that they dismantled the system that existed before without even thinking where the new system will be and how it will be invented and what it would look like. Some countries proudly announced that they set an experimental school or university with cutting-edge technology determined to bring into the world future generations. Let's listen to this again and give me the answer as a parent. Do you really want a group of crazy, passionate, charismatic, forward-looking users of disruptive technology experiment with the future of your child?
Exactly.
Would you?
Because it's an untested method, so you'd rather go with something that's strong and stable. In fact,
because we need a base, no?
Well, in fact, you've been quoted in the past as stating that there's a popularity of the British public school system amongst a certain class of Russian society, and that this is down to a failure in the Russian education system. Is that still the case?
Absolutely. Yes, but it's not just the case in Russia. Where else you could rely on the education that much that you know that your child will be coming out of GCSEs with a strong knowledge of language, of science, of math, that it will be equal all around the country. Basically, the general education level in England is GCSEs minimum. So you expect that the person who is coming to you to work would know a simple math.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
and you know the rules and you know what to ask. There is system, and system has to be led with understanding what you're getting. But if someone is experimenting it and saying this you need for future, now not need for math, you go and study coding at the 6 years old. Yes, sure, coding is very important now, and it's one of the qualities that people hiring for if you know coding. But besides of the coding, you better know how to write.
Those interpersonal skills are key.
Not just the personal skills. Personal skills are very important. But if we are talking about the abilities, I would like to separate. There is the skills that you will be paid for, and there is the skills that you will be invited for the dinner party. It's good to have both, but to mix pleasure and your job is probably a wrong thing. You wouldn't have both.
Now, of course, you manage a quite large and well-trained team. Are they the secret to Scion success?
Absolutely. They are the secret for Scion success. I do lead. But the leadership, if I were to lead people in my company, my students, their parents, tutors, in a traditional view of a leader, such as leader being a hero, a chosen special person, right? Who set the direction, make the key decisions, and energize the troop. Let's go, we do this and achieve that. I will achieve some success, and probably some of the heights will be very impressive. But I'm sure it wouldn't be. The success will be short-lived. It wouldn't be for a long time. There is not a problem to run a company for 2 or 3 years easily. We do all know startups that have been established by the charismatic leader, but we never heard of them 3 years later, right? To stay in a business for 25 years and stand through the troubles, expected pitfalls, and unexpected events is a skill that develops over the time with dedication, concentration, and yes, with sacrifices. But that's how you build the trust with your clientele, how you build the trust with your partners. I've been through troubled time, and I've been through a very high time. And I'm going to stay.
Well, it's fantastic to hear about perseverance, because that is an attribute that really does lend to success in life. Now, in your best practice article, you say that it is of the utmost importance for the next generation to have the skills necessary, not just academically for life, but also more of a well-rounded individual. Do you feel that the current educational regimes are turning out unprepared graduates?
Well, I will be very careful to say that I actually think that they don't turn down enough. First of all, I believe that educational authorities, universities, they have to take the students who are prepared to go through the perseverance, and a passion for the subject is not enough. It's just not enough for success. Let's say that I've been very passionate about ballet, being a ballet dancer, right? But then I grew up, and my body grew up, and the ballet dancer is finished, but I'm still passionate about it.
Right.
Would anybody pay for me to watch me dancing a ballet? I don't think so.
So
but
it's more
I still
about
have to leave.
It's more about choosing a reasonable career path or a reasonable field of study, as opposed to just studying something that one enjoys. Is that what we're saying here?
Yes, but it is a time when some things that you absolutely hate, and I would never be a doctor. I just scared of the blood, and it's very reasonable for me to go through the limitations of that I was born with, created. So basically, I would never be a doctor. But the cutting off your limits that just you're just like that is actually a good choice when you choose a career. But besides of going for something that will be useful for your life, I think it's important to dedicate 3 years of your time at the bachelor's degree actually learning a skill. And if you are learning, let's say, psychology or any numbers science, math, engineering, but you never will be an engineer. But the skills that engineering degree or STEM degree would give to you, you will use for the rest of your life. It's logic. It's something to do with the numbers. In your life, I think everyone has to know financial literacy. And if you're good with, if you learn how to work with the numbers, even in your private life, it will be very useful for you.
Now, you mentioned earlier that the next generation coming is sometimes can be rather challenging. Can you elaborate on that?
Yes, I think, yes, everybody complains about the next generation, right?
It's a tale as old as time.
Yes, and I have, and it's very nice. Simon Sinek, I think he's the one who was complaining about millennials. And the first reason why he believes that millennials are labeled as a hard to manage, lazy, entitled, unreliable, infantile, as the first reason for this is parenting, then technology, impatience, and environment, right? Parenting was the first one. So how is it going with a parent-child relationship, child-teacher relationship, parent-teacher relationship? I wonder why anyone would want to have children in the first place, because we moved from the we moved to the child-serving economy, right? So it's helicopter parents who are just simply forgetting their own life, and they all surround their life around the children, right? The fantastic AR, VR, tutor apps, selective schools, Blackboard, Whiteboard, behavioral control apps, personality tests, career profiling, character predisposition test, Alexa, Siri, everything is the robots who will be taught how to soothe your child when it's depressed, right? So it's technology been backing up. Everything is around to bring the next generation to the standards that will be fantastic future. But one thing we forgot to give them, what we didn't have as a children, as a parents, is actually what we had. We had very clear stated rules. We had very clear stated manners. We had a respect to the teachers. We had a certain behavioral pattern. How do you listen to the older generation? How do you listen to your teacher? And at this point of time, I see that parents are very quickly obviously tiring of being responsible and blamed for whatever their child doing. They're very quickly blaming the school, blaming the teachers. Teachers are not very inspiring. Teachers are not able to motivate. I have a parents who are coming and said, could you please tell this and this to my child? I ask, why don't you tell it? And they just say, we are scared. Parents are scared of their own children.
So we need a return to more of a firm framework within the household for the coming generations.
Yes, and if all of us, meaning all of us parents and the educators, are blamed for bringing up the very difficult children, then don't we need to get together and actually see what we can do for that child? Because if we just praising the child because the child woke up 8 o'clock in the morning and went to school, I don't think it deserves praise.
Well, this sounds like a whole change in mindset is needed. What steps can be taken to achieve this?
I think teachers and parents should really get together more often and stop blaming each other for whatever child doing. And I think first thing you have to do is give the child responsibility. As simple as what child is responsible to do around the house. And it couldn't be just to taking the garbage out and you're clapping and putting the fireworks because child took the garbage out. No, it has to be a responsibility. And if we follow the Mia Kelmer-Pringle approach, the needs of children, the first thing is the need for love and security, yes, we educators and the teachers, and the parents, we have to look after our children, and we have to provide love and security at home, right? And the next one is the new experiences. Yes, your child has to wake up and has to try something new. This is how we grow. And we ourselves have to try something new, to lead with example, by example. And the next one is praise and recognition. And praise and recognition, you can't praise them for something which is expected to do. Otherwise, you will create, there is a term that's called stroke economy.
Mm-hmm.
It's everybody needs a kind of a stroke, an encouragement, acknowledgement that you exist. And a normal person will be going to like maybe 60 strokes a day. Let's say you go for the coffee and they say, "Oh, hello, how are you doing today? Here's your stroke." But if you stroke the child all the time and your child requires for the well-being 600 strokes a day, gosh, it's a high-maintenance employee. What you're going to do with them? You need to put in your salary package the provision for someone who will be motivating and acknowledging and praising that one child to work. It has to be very deliberate, and you praise the behavior that you want to get. If your child is behaving bad, don't praise it. Don't give any recognition for that. Don't give any fuel to behave the same way again. And the last one, but not the least one, is responsibilities that I already mentioned. Responsibilities for what? You decide. If there is no responsibilities in the house, then how do you expect them to understand what does it mean, responsibilities? How do you expect them to take responsibilities for the town, for the community, for the whole world, if a child in the beginning, in the formative years, never had any responsibilities?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, it does seem, and it has been stated before, that the coming generation knows quite a lot about their rights, but not what their responsibilities in a society are. And being a productive and responsible member of a society is essential for that society to be successful. You also mentioned that intergenerational wealth can lead to almost an intellectual malaise of sorts in successive heirs. What are you doing to address this?
Well, it's a very difficult topic, and it's my desire in the last 20 years was useful in leading the next generation and their parents to find the way how to save the wealth, how to enhance the wealth, how to not lose it. And I'm particularly interested in an expression of a third generation curse from the stableman to the gentleman back to the stableman in the three generations. And that's my one of the topics that I'm interested besides of my work. It's good that it's related to my work. And I looked at the very famous dynasty, let's say. For example, Medici in France for 300 years, and how they were choosing who will be the leader of which part of the business. And they had a deep down when there was not very strong leaders of family, or there was a sibling rivalry. There were a lot of things. But one thing I learned that you have to remember as a difficult decision, easy life. Easy decision is difficult life. Sometimes a child doesn't want to lead the family, doesn't want to do anything, but they are capable to do it. They have the characteristics and the skills to actually lead the family business. And in this case, you have to find the dialogue between parents, between future, between advisors to avoid the structures, the legal structures, funds that will be taken over to prevent the child is losing the money, losing what our generation, what your grandparents was working for, which is quite often.
Well, it is a very well-known phenomenon in the past century. In fact, a very famous example would be the Vanderbilt family of America. Now, it is undisputed that there is quite a bit of wealth left, but the vast chunk of it went within a whole generation. So there was one generation of very wealthy and successful Vanderbilts, and then it was gone within 50 years. So it's trying to avoid that sort of a situation that you are striving towards. Now, just to change tack slightly, how do you feel the United Kingdom's exit from the European Union will affect international students?
Well, I think actually it wouldn't affect much of international students because still British education is providing the base, very solid base, unquestionable base. And we have new developments, and I like how England approach very cautiously all this new and charismatic, passionate, and self-driven economy.
Mm-hmm.
You're giving the base, and it's exactly when the children need the base. Once you have a manners, once you have a rules, then you can build on that, whatever your charisma is saying to do. But if you don't have a good base, how are you going to lead? How are you going to thrive? Where are you going to find the passion for anything? You have nothing to build the passion on. So I think that the educational system is fantastic, and I don't think it will be any suffering from the Brexit. If anything, I think it would be even more popular.
Do you believe that part of the educational establishment in this country's success is also down to British culture in general?
Yes. Yes. British culture is dictating that you... well, I am British. I should talk about me being British as well. But it's one of the attractions that drawing people to country. That's something that you could rely on. You could rely on a word. You could rely on a gentleman's agreement. You could rely that you will be actually protected in this country.
And how do you feel the British personality and the British culture differs from those of Eastern Europe and Asia?
It does differ a lot. Very interesting question. We are different. The Eastern European different, the Asian is different, English are different. And to be honest, I really admire the differences. I don't want to be like an Asian. I don't want to be like any English. I don't want to be like a pure Russian or Polish or whatever. I like London because it's international. I could pick something good from each culture. But England got English people, they do have something that's very reliable, admirable. It's stability, it's confidence and pride. That sometimes may be annoying for other people. Yes, I am English and I am proud of it. I am English, I am in New York and I am proud of it. You have something that people want to have.
Well, of course, the news at the moment is full of talk of the coronavirus. Do you feel that this will impact your business in any way?
It already does. It already does. And, well, I could talk only about my business and my situation, my issues. If you tell to a child that you have a legal, legitimate reason not to go to school, what do you think? But on the top of this, I had mothers, I had parents, local parents, not a foreign parents, local parents, who were saying, when they are going to close the school, but I could just go to the country, lock myself there with my children and love them. So coronavirus, there are some good in this. It's pervasive good, but children love it.
Now, do you feel that there is anything that government needs to do to stabilize businesses who interact with those traveling from outside the United Kingdom?
To be honest, I'm not qualified to answer that question. I don't think I have enough knowledge to suggest, and I'm afraid that whatever I would advise or propose wouldn't be valid. I just don't have enough knowledge and don't have enough tools.
Well, let's give you the moment, a chance for 30 seconds here. Say I was to name you Minister of State for Education for the next 30 seconds. If you had a magic wand, what educational policies would you put into place?
Parents and teachers have to get together for the cause of their children more often. And educational ministers have to think about increase the paying time for the teachers to spend time with the students. The classes should be smaller.
So it all boils down to communication in the end for success.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Now, unfortunately, our time together is drawing to its close. But before I let you go, in the next 10 years, what are the greatest challenges that will affect the international student industry?
Internet schools, online tuition, online learning, that's available for everybody all around the world. And that's fantastic. But there is no substitute for one-to-one to see your teacher in front of you. So I believe that education will be more expensive because of you do need a mentor that you see, that we are still human, that you could touch, you could ask the question, you see eyes to eyes and not through the computer. You can't teach empathy through the computer. You can't teach Siri to tell you, oh, don't worry, next time you will be doing better. It's not going to work. We want to know that you care. And that care could be seen only from personal contact.
Well, Inga, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the podcast today. And I very much hope we get a chance to speak again at some point in the near future. Inga, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Matthew.
I hope that you enjoyed our chat with Inga Neaves, especially learning more about the challenges facing the sector and how the whole team at Scion Mastery are continuing to raise standards. And now, if you haven't heard it before, is Jonathan White's exclusive interview with the Parliamentary Review's co-chairman, Lord Pickles. Lord Pickles served as Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government in David Cameron's cabinet, before receiving a peerage in 2018. Lord Pickles remains active as the UK's anti-corruption champion and the country's special envoy for post-Holocaust issues, as well as being a keen vexologist. That's flags to you and I. And now, Jonathan White's exclusive interview with Lord Pickles.
Lord Pickles, thank you very much for joining us today.
Pleasure.
Now, I'm sure you won't mind me reminding the listeners that you've been involved in politics, both local and national, for quite a number of decades. Indeed, before the days we were in the common market. Given your experience over those years, what thoughts have you had over the last few weeks and months about the current political situation the country finds itself in?
Situation is quite dire because we have a parliament that is by and large useless. It's like a bored teenager on a long drive, and it knows what it doesn't want, and it's so bored with Brexit, but it can't agree. So no matter what you put up, it's against it. Are you in favour of a referendum? No, I don't want that. Are you in favour of remaining within the single market? No, I don't want that. Are you in favour of... No, I don't want to do that. No. And are you in favour of leaving without a deal? No, we don't want to do that. So it's against everything, but there isn't enough votes to be in favour of something. And it could be by the time this podcast goes out, that Boris has started on the process of the bill, because we'll be voting on that today. But even then, what people don't seem to understand, this is not the end of Brexit.
Right.
This is barely opening the door of Brexit. We've got years of negotiations about trade agreements, relationships with Europe, putting down pieces of legislation. We get our agriculture, our fisheries, our financial services into place. Brexit is going to go on and on and on and on. I'm sure we are.
Now, the question is, I should actually remind listeners that we are talking on the day that the second reading of the European Withdrawal Act will take place. So, as we speak, we don't quite know. As, well, perhaps like the government front bench, don't know what's going to happen. You compare Parliament to a petulant teenager. What do you do to a petulant teenager to sort it out? Is there a chance that it will see sense and push this through this bill without making amendments? Is there a chance it will vote for its own for a general election? How do you see this playing out at the moment?
The sensible thing will be to put this deal through, because I've always been of the view a deal is better than no deal, because this is just the beginning. In order to start the process of Brexit, start the process of the United Kingdom taking over powers that it's not really exercised for 40 odd years, the smart thing is to get this thing through now. But in a way, it's not about Brexit itself. If there was a free vote, this deal would have gone through. Mrs May's deal would have gone through. But it's about politics. It's about a Labour Party that thinks it has a chance, trying to make the Prime Minister, whether it was Theresa May or Boris Johnson, look as though that they are in office but not in power, of delaying as long as possible. There's a lot of talk about an election in the autumn, maybe back end of November, beginning of December, something for us to look forward to before Christmas. It's beginning to look less likely. It's beginning to look as though they might want to drag it into spring to get as far away as possible from the rather decisive moment that Boris came back with a deal. We have to remind ourselves that nobody thought he could deliver a deal, and it does quite shock them. And if you remember, all this process went through in order to ensure that we're left without a deal. When we have a deal, suddenly, oh no, it's not that kind of deal. We don't want that kind of deal. We want something different.
I think the vast majority of people in this country, whether Remain or Leave, now would be very satisfied for this to come to a amiable conclusion. And as you correctly just said, because when it does come to those in the opposition who claim to want this to end, and then introduce wrecking amendments, they introduce new objections to it, the general public are getting quite frustrated.
But you've got to understand that quite a lot of people don't get beyond a small area within Westminster, sometimes cliche referred to as the Westminster bubble, and go back to their own patch. Now, by and large, everybody hates their MP, except when they're at home, doing the fairs, wandering around, helping people. So they, in a way, they're cosseted to that great, which I feel is coming as a tsunami of change.
You, of course, MP for Brentwood for
25 years.
Absolutely. What would you? Of course, you resident there as well, despite being a proud Yorkshireman, obviously representing a good Essex seat. What would you say to your constituents right now? Hang in there; it'll be all right.
Well, it's different when you're a member of Parliament, because you've got to kind of toe the government line a little bit. So one thing I found now is I've got my weekend back and I say what I want, and I think I always say to our constituents is that it is pretty hopeless down there.
Excellent. Well, on that, I think, honest assessment, it's something I think the Parliamentary Review has always done quite well, talking frankly about problems, issues, and also not just good practice. But leadership.
Well, I was used to read it when I was a member of Parliament, because what you want more than anything is you want to meet people with different experiences, and I've always sort of found it quite a kind of a chatty magazine, but also you would see things that you would not automatically have come across. I certainly have attended the receptions over the year, and it's amazing the things you kind of pick up.
And I think it's important to stress it's not because politicians are uninterested, because honestly, as you'll know more than anyone, it's an issue of time. And to be able to have a channel and a platform where you can keep communication lines between businesses, schools and policymakers is so exceptionally important.
No, I think so, and it's important that it's beholden to nobody. People, pay to be part of the publication, pay for to be members, and it's a way of not beholden to government, not beholden to anything.
Echoing the words, of course, your fellow Chairman Lord Blunkett has said, what some might not know is that you started your political journey perhaps even further left than David Blunkett.
Oh, absolutely, I was a communist.
Now, what was it?
At the age of 14, I was bought the Trotsky's History of the Russian Revolution, and I read it from cover to cover. I tried to read it a few years back, and I just couldn't follow anything.
Oh, so I was going to say perhaps you might know the minds of the show front bench better than they do themselves.
From my position when I first joined, I would regard them as recalcitrant running dogs of the capitalist system.
Now, what was it that moved you from radical Marxists to running the only inner city council controlled by the Conservatives in the 80s?
Well, I was very young, and I was fascinated by what was happening in what was then Czechoslovakia and Dubček, and the revolution that was taking place there inside communism, and the way in which he was repressed by Mr. Brezhnev, and the tanks and taking over. I was so angry. And I'm 16, remember. I'm really angry. And I thought, what's the most outrageous thing I can do? I'll join the Conservative Party as a protest. And I kind of sticked around, and my family thought it was the funniest thing that ever happened to it. I was Eric the Tory. And
I think you announced this quite grandly as a grand protest.
I did indeed, but I kept going down, and it was an exciting time. People were developing the ideas of what the Conservative Party should be. Selsdon man, even Heath looked radical. We had different ideas, and it eventually clicked. And at some point, I became a Conservative, and that was 51 years ago. I think I'm definitely 100% a Tory now.
Through and through.
Through and through.
Although I do know the story, most people might guess that a dynamo Conservative like yourself would have perhaps a portrait of Mr. Thatcher or Mr. Churchill in their office. But who is it that you have?
I had Che Guevara. Which I always had him over my left shoulder for visitors, and they always used to you see their eyes going up and thinking, who, can't possibly be it. Someone asked me if it was Desi Arnaz. I thought it was married to Lucille Ball. But no, the reason I did that was to remind me and to remind my officials that without constant vigilance, the cigar-chomping commies would take over.
I'm sure David Bunk was in the room to reply to that, actually. But in that long journey, you eventually ended up, of course, in 2010, doing something most Conservatives would never thought they would have to do, but in a coalition government with, of all people, the Liberal Democrats.
That's right.
Now, something I think perhaps today more than ever, people in our politics seems to be almost wholly determined on how we voted in a referendum 3 years ago.
Yeah, the most normal thing would happen after something like that would be the country would come together, and if anything, we're more divided I thought working in the coalition, I'm proud to have been part of that coalition. I'm proud to have worked alongside the Liberal Democrats, who I think realised that, like all minority partners in a coalition, they would suffer at the polls.
Do you think we've lost the ability recently as a people to work with those that we might disagree with on issues more than we used to?
I'm not sure that's right. You can see various members of the Conservative Party working closely with Liberal Democrats and Labour to defeat their own government, but it's not a thing I think I would want to encourage.
Quite. And I should remind listeners, we are recording this obviously in Victoria, just over the road at Cardinal Place, a fantastically new development site which wouldn't have been there without some of your legislation. What was the proudest?
I personally approved it.
Absolutely. What was the proudest moment, do you think, in serving Secretary for 5 years?
It's my actual proudest moment. We did a thing called Troubled Families, which was the first centre-right attempt to deal with poverty and to deal with difficult families that were causing a disproportionately large amount of call upon the state, and it was on the basis of tough love. It's on the basis of getting people into jobs. It's about dealing with the family as a whole, not just one or two individuals that were having a problem. And I'm pleased that it's continued.
And since, I should very much stress, since of course you're stepped down being an MP, you do have your weekends back, but that's not to say you haven't remained very active and very busy. Of course, continues the government's anti-corruption champion, shone the harsh light of day over malpractice in the local government. Indeed, the Queen's speech we've just had includes some of your recommendations from 2016. I think a couple of things on that. First of all, are you surprised, I may imagine you may not be, at some of the backlash towards, in this country, introducing voter ID for voting?
It is absurd, and it's particularly absurd coming from the Labour Party, because it was largely Labour's vulnerability that got my interest in trying to do something about it. And it's a bit like saying, you're requiring people to show some ID, that this is suppressing voting. It's a bit like saying the post office is suppressing parcels because they demand to see some ID. I think they've got a bee into their bonnet that this is something like that goes in the state to repress. It's not. It's about giving confidence to the system. Now, the Electoral Commission and foreign observers have warned us for such a long time that our electoral system is vulnerable. And it's to misquote John Major, we are really sort of old maids cycling to evensong and war-bane. Yeah, it's such a basic thing, and it's an important thing. And it was kind of interesting in some of the trials. They did a focus group with a bunch of young Asian girls, and they said they thought the process of a photo ID would actually give them a greater confidence in the fairness of the system. I make all kinds of recommendations to stop postal vote harvesting, to stop various fraud taking place, to stop intimidation at counts, to stop intimidation outside polling stations.
And I think you referenced it earlier, the Westminster bubble. A lot of the places where this occurs and the places where this does go on are places where perhaps many members, many people in the press don't usually go to.
No, they don't. We saw a YouGov poll that said the overwhelming majority, well in the 60%, thought this idea was sensible.
Yeah, and I imagine you're quite proud that recommendation is in the speech.
Yes, I'm a bit frustrated they didn't do it sooner, but nevertheless I'm very happy that they are doing it.
It's as if the government's time has been taken up by something else and we've not focused on anything domestic.
Absolutely.
But with a man, though, with his roots in local government, do you think, and how much you've worked with that report, especially looking at them carefully, how would you rate our current state of local municipal politics?
Local government's very good. I mean, local government, don't get me wrong, it's by and large corruption-free, and it does a remarkably good job. And it was, in truth, my worries about local government and that these measures were brought in. I don't believe the fraud is big enough to be able to take a parliamentary seat, but it is big enough to take a council. And if you are negligent, uncaring about the probity of the poll, you're likely to be equally negligent about the awarding of contracts to your friends. So it's all past that. But local government is a very enduring part of our constitution. I got a bit stick because we had to take some money from them, but by and large they survive very well.
Excellent. Now, beyond obviously that work, you're also, of course, the British envoy for post-Holocaust issues.
Yeah, sure.
I think very dear to your heart. I know you've done some fantastic work recently, including with obviously former Shadow Chancellor from the Review, Ed Balls. Would you mind, if you could just let the listeners know what projects you are working with and really the importance that has to so many communities around the country?
Well, I used to be very unpleasant about Ed Ball, and he used to be very unpleasant about me. But I found working with him remarkably easy, and we've not had a single row in 2 years, and by now we're beginning to be able to finish each other's sentences. We're building a memorial to the Holocaust next to Parliament with a learning centre below it, and the reason why the Prime Minister chose that site is that it was David Cameron, and he wanted to ensure that when people left the memorial, they would look and see Parliament and recognise that it was the last bastion against tyranny. But more important, to remind people who work in Parliament that the legislature has a choice. It can either protect its citizens or it can oppress its citizens. And we do know that it was a compliant legislature that brought in the Nuremberg laws. And at a time when there are parts of Europe that are seeking to rewrite their history and seeking to see themselves as only the victims of the Nazis, I'm determined that we should tell the truth in an unblinking way. We are, I suppose, at a critical crossroads when the last survivor is likely to be no longer with us within the next decade and a half. And at that point, we do know that history starts to be reassessed. I think it was Simon Sharma that talked about this, and he was referring to the French Revolution. And of course, most of the books written in the 1850s are the ones that have shaped our view of the French Revolution. But the difference is this, that slightly over 100 years ago, my grandfather Edgar grabbed hold of his Lee Enfield and walked out of a trench in the Somme and walked towards the Germans. And within a few minutes, most of the people he'd been brought up with, most of his friends were dead. Nobody doubts that he did that. But there's a whole industry out there that doubts that the Holocaust took place. So that's why it's important that we help frame that narrative.
And you reference as well, it's so important, especially at this time of history, after 7 years afterwards, that young people in schools get the correct education about it. How do we compare as a country in doing that compared to some of our European friends?
We I think, compare remarkably well, particularly because we've got a mixture of things. We ensure through the lessons of Auschwitz that 2 pupils from every secondary school go to Auschwitz each year, that they have a preliminary meeting, a visit and a wrap-up. We ensure that Holocaust Day is remembered in January. Now, I can remember starting that, or I'm not starting it, but being part of a foot soldier of people that put it together. And, it was like one man and a dog, but now it's quite a massive, it's a massive event. So I think we are quite good at remembering that. I think Where we perhaps do need to have a wider understanding is beyond the death counts. And we need to kind of understand the Anstalt-Gruppen, which was the roving murder squads, how important they were. You were more likely to have been shot in a ditch than to end up in a death camp. The hinterland of that is Lithuania, where I was last week talking to colleagues, and through Belarus and the Ukraine. And it's really important that we ensure that we register where those death sites are.
And I think certainly, and I'm going to sit down next to speak, which hopefully won't be too long away. I think we'd be very happy to keep updates on how that project is going, because it's so important. People do need to be aware of it. Looking to the future, though, I imagine you were actually very content and happy. Former Prime Minister, friend and colleague David Cameron just released his book, and you're quite unscathed from it.
I came out, he was very nice about it. I even bought the audio version because he was reading it, and he obviously, but there was a fair bit of affection, and I'm rather glad they left out one or two of the other embarrassing things.
Maybe another time.
Yeah.
But it's important, I think, and I'm conscious of time, but I think it's important that today people have become so perhaps caught up in what's happening in this country regarding Brexit. Looking to the future, what would you say that it's a positive thing that this country has to look forward to?
Well, we're a large trading nation. We're a large economy. We're a liberal democracy, and it would be good to get through Brexit over the coming years, and it would be good to start to look at some of the social issues that we need to tackle, those that have been left behind by our economic progress, and it will be good to see some solid investment in this country, both in terms of its infrastructure, but also in terms of the way it operates as a democracy.
And I know that's going to be a huge focus of the next review. Pickles, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
As always, it's been a pleasure interviewing and learning from our guests. I hope that you all enjoyed listening. Until next time, let's raise a glass to raising standards. Goodbye.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. You can find every episode on iTunes, YouTube, and Spotify. The views expressed by each guest in the podcast are their own. They do not represent the opinions of the Parliamentary Review, Westminster Publications, Lord Pickles, Lord Blunkett, David Curry, or any other guest on the podcast. If you'd like to know more about the Parliamentary Review, please visit www.theparliamentaryreview.co.uk.